Mr. President, yesterday I joined with fellow leaders of the Environment and Public Works Committee to introduce America's Transportation and Infrastructure Act, a 5-year reauthorization that would deliver resources to repair and maintain critical surface transportation infrastructure. Today, the committee approved our comprehensive legislation with a strong bipartisan vote, 21-0 in our committee this morning. As chair of the EPW's Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee, I am incredibly proud of this legislation. This is the result of months of serious negotiations with full committee Chairman Brasso and Ranking Member Carper, my subcommittee, and my ranking member, Senator Cardin of Maryland. It was not always easy, but I think we have produced a bill that achieves our priorities and secures needed investments in our nation's infrastructure. First and foremost, the bill provides additional funding for highway investment. How many times do we hear, we don't have enough money to complete this, we can't get it done? But this also maintains the state's share through their formula dollars. That means that a rising tide lifts all boats, whether a state is urban or rural, like my home state of West Virginia. The majority of these funds, 90% of these funds, are distributed by the formula to the states, providing maximum flexibility to our states' programs. And with the full 5-year reauthorization, state DOTs will have the certainty that they need to plan their investments without fear of lapses in their contracting authority. After all, it's the states, not the bureaucrats in Washington, that know their communities' needs the best. Our legislation would get rid of some of the obstacles that states face as they work to start and finalize infrastructure plans. They take forever. They cost so much. The bill incorporates the Trump administration's focus on one federal decision. Under that policy, the U.S. Department of Transportation is in charge of leading the regulatory review process, one federal decision. And it would consolidate the review of other federal agencies like the EPA, the Corps of Engineers, who weigh in on these projects. That means that states won't end up in a regulatory purgatory, going back and forth from agency to agency, seeking endless approvals. DOT would also maintain a federal dashboard system so the states can see where they stand in the process. America's Transportation Infrastructure Act directs the Department of Transportation to work to complete its review process within 2 years and to push other agencies to expedite their regulatory reviews. Everything drags on so much, and it makes it so long and expensive. This would push our agencies to expedite their regulatory reviews under its own categorical exclusions. That's a fancy term for when the department doesn't think a full, costly, and time-consuming permitting process is necessary for a straightforward infrastructure project, such as replacing a bridge from right where it is and putting a new bridge right where it is. Takes forever. We would eliminate that. We also worked in a bipartisan way to promote natural infrastructure that will help reduce costs and timelines, diminish environmental impacts, and improve the resiliency of our infrastructure to natural disasters like floods that we see so common in my part of the country. West Virginia has the unfortunate title of being in the top 5 states of structurally deficient bridges. That's why I'm very proud that America's Transportation and Infrastructure Act includes language I co-sponsored with Senator Brown in implementing the new bridge investment program. This program will infuse $6 billion over 5 years in additional funding to fix bridges in poor condition and dedicate that funding that is essential to addressing this problem. When faced with a decision on using scarce taxpayer dollars on a new highway expansion or improving bridge safety, states too often, it's too tempting, opt for the appeal of a ribbon cutting on a new stretch of highway. Now, hopefully, they won't have to make that choice. And we can reduce both congestion and the odds of a bridge failure, something not only threatens our lives, but also cuts off a community while they wait for for a costly replacement. The Climate and Resilience portion of America's Transportation Infrastructure Act will reduce emissions from the transportation sector and ensure that taxpayers are not repeatedly replacing infrastructure affected by natural disasters. This portion of the bill also includes important bipartisan legislation that I co-sponsored. The first, it's called the Use It Act. This would facilitate the deployment of carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies by reducing regulatory obligations that the project stakeholders would face. And it also includes the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, which would provide funding to states and communities to replace older, smog-producing vehicles like obsolete school buses with modern vehicles that use diesel, propane, natural gas, and electricity. Most importantly for West Virginia and for broader Appalachia, the legislation includes several provisions that I wrote to accelerate the completion of the Appalachian Development Highway System and reauthorize the economic development activities of the Appalachian Regional Commission. The commission was first authorized in 1965. The Appalachian Development Highway System was designed to better integrate our region with the Midwest, Northeast, and Mid-Atlantic and South. For an economically distressed area with communities that are relatively isolated, this infrastructure network is vital. It's vital for attracting investment, for creating new economic opportunities, and for improving the quality of life. The Appalachian Regional Commission has found that the highway system has already created and supported more than 168,000 jobs and generated $7.8 billion in wage income that otherwise would not have existed. Those wages, in turn, drive local and federal tax bases. Completing the system would generate an additional $8.7 billion in annual economic activity. It would support another 46,000 jobs and lead to an additional $2.7 billion in worker income. These are very significant numbers, and I can't really overstate the impact that this additional economic activity would have in our region. Unfortunately, the highway system, the Appalachian Development Highway System, is only 90% complete. The remaining 10% generally represents the most challenging mountain terrain. And that means that this is the costliest and the most environmentally complicated miles to complete. But we have got to get this done. The highway system was started almost 55 years ago. America is better than letting an infrastructure priority just sit around for more than half a century with no end in sight due to lack of funding or regulatory certainty. This was also a promise made to the people of Appalachia. The Appalachian Development Highway System completion was identified as being in our national interest in the last two highway bills. But it's the American Transportation Infrastructure Act that will actually provide a mechanism to move us toward the finish line. Beyond the regulatory reforms I just spoke about, my language states that for states that for whatever reason have accrued significant Appalachian Development Highway System balances, they can exchange those dollars to states like West Virginia that are still working to complete projects like our Quarter H. But we lack the resources to engineer and construct these challenging remaining miles. In return, those states that turn their dollars back into the Appalachian Development Highway System dollars, they will receive dollars that they can use for any project in their state that would otherwise be eligible for a federal highway project. That means that states can respond to the changing transportation needs in their particular area. They use excess dollars for an underdescribed federal loan program, which has historically not contributed to infrastructure investment in rural America. This will be a win for all states involved. Those needing additional funding will be able to continue to advance their Appalachian highway system, and states that have needed to shift their focus, say on growing urban transportation needs, will have the added flexibility to be able to do that. I appreciate my fellow Appalachian Highway System State Committee colleagues for working with me to include this provision, as well as Leader McConnell's support on this section of the bill and our counterpart legislation the Advancing Infrastructure Development in Appalachia Act. The committee also included language that I wrote and worked for those individuals to reauthorize the Appalachian Regional Commission, a key economic development agency at $180 million a year. My provision also doubles to $20 million the funding available for something I care deeply about, that is broadband deployment in Appalachia, which is a critical tool for connecting our communities and keeping our region and making our region more competitive. I thank Leader McConnell and Ranking Member Cardin and Senator Wicker for their support of this language on the standalone ARC authorization bill. Leader McConnell also joined me in authorizing the ARC to provide up to $5 million in grants to support the development of a Central Appalachian natural gas liquids storage hub, along with the associated downstream manufacturing sector. This infrastructure project would be huge to the economies of West Virginia, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. In fact, the American Chemistry Council estimates that the regional market and downstream manufacturing would generate $36 billion in capital investment and more than 100,000 jobs. It would also help keep a much larger share of the economic value and employment opportunity in our states where the resources is, compared to just producing and then exporting the gas and associated natural gas liquids to other parts of the country or abroad. Secretary Perry and the Department of Energy have also endorsed this concept of the project, as well as the significant economic and energy security dividends that it would pay for America and the entire United States. This is somewhat modest investment, given the significant private sector capital needed to build this out, but it's essential that the federal government send clear messages to potential investors that it supports this driver of economic growth in an area that would greatly benefit. This legislation gives the ARC the power to lead the way. Investment in our country's infrastructure is vital to the many aspects of our American life, from keeping us competitive in the global economy and keeping our drivers safe. There's a lot of safety aspects in this bill, to reducing irritating congestion and minimizing impacts to the economy. America's Transportation Infrastructure Act delivers on all these fronts and ensures that rural America will benefit equally from these investments. Not only will our legislation help rebuild and repair our infrastructure system, but it will also help us create new infrastructure opportunities for generations to come. I appreciate my colleagues' collaboration. My colleague from Rhode Island is on the floor. He was on in the committee this morning when we voted, both of us, in favor of this legislation. It is a bipartisan bill working to make sure that this country sees a 5-year highway reauthorization, all the benefits that it would provide. I thank all of my Senate colleagues. I think all of my Senate colleagues will find a lot to like in this legislation. I'm hoping that we get it on the floor in the fall, and I encourage their support when it comes time for a vote. I yield the floor.